Welcome to Dreamtale Sleep Stories. Tonight's reading is Snow White and the Seven Guardians. Settle into your bed or sofa and let your shoulders, jaw, and eyelids grow heavy. Inhale slowly. 1, 2, 3. Sigh the air away, allowing the day to fade into quiet dark. With every soft inhale, you invite fresh English phrases. With every gentle exhale, stray thoughts drift farther off. Behind my voice flows a gentle 528 Hz melody, renowned for guiding the mind toward deep relaxation. Keep your eyes closed or follow the captions, whichever feels right. Simply receive the rhythm and resonance of the language. Deep in rest, tonight's phrases will take root like seeds, ready to bloom into stronger English skills with the morning light. When you feel settled, hold that unhurried breath and allow yourself to drift into the tale. Snow White and the Seven Guardians begins now, and when the story's final line has faded, the music will linger a little longer, carrying you gently deeper into sleep. Princess Snow White had grown up in the magnificent castle of Valdoria, where her father, King Edmund, ruled with wisdom and justice. Her mother, Queen Isabella, had died when Snow White was only 7 years old, leaving behind a legacy of kindness that the young princess strived to honor every day. For several years, father and daughter lived contentedly together, with Snow White learning the arts of diplomacy, literature, and natural sciences from the finest tutors in the kingdom. Princess Snow White had grown up in the magnificent castle of Valdoria, where her father, King Edmund, ruled with wisdom and justice. Her mother, Queen Isabella, had died when Snow White was only 7 years old, leaving behind a legacy of kindness that the young princess strived to honor every day. For several years, father and daughter lived contentedly together, with Snow White learning the arts of diplomacy, literature, and natural sciences from the finest tutors in the kingdom. However, when Snow White turned 16, King Edmund decided to remarry. His new wife, Lady Morgana, was undeniably beautiful and possessed considerable charm, but there was something unsettling about her piercing green eyes and the way shadows seemed to follow her wherever she went. Lady Morgana claimed to be the daughter of a distant noble family, though no one could verify her origins with certainty. What the court did not know was that Morgana possessed knowledge of ancient magic, particularly the dark arts that had been forbidden in Valdoria for centuries. She had spent years studying in hidden libraries and making pacts with supernatural entities, all in pursuit of eternal youth and unrivaled power. The magic mirror she brought with her to the castle was no ordinary looking glass. It was a portal to otherworldly knowledge and a tool for scrying that could reveal truths hidden from mortal eyes. Every morning, in the privacy of her chambers, Morgana would consult her magical mirror with the same ritualistic question. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? For 2 years, the mirror consistently replied that she was indeed the most beautiful woman in the kingdom. This answer satisfied her vanity and reassured her that her magical practices were maintaining her supernatural beauty. But on Snow White's 18th birthday, everything changed. When Morgana posed her usual question to the mirror, the mystical voice responded with words that chilled her to the bone. "You are fair, my queen, it's true. But Snow White is now more beautiful than you." The mirror's revelation was not merely about physical beauty. It spoke of a deeper radiance that came from Snow White's pure heart, her connection to nature, and her genuine love for all living creatures. Consumed by jealousy and rage, Morgana immediately began plotting Snow White's elimination. She could not bear the thought of being surpassed by anyone, especially not by her stepdaughter, whose very existence now threatened everything Morgana had worked to achieve. Using her magical abilities, she summoned a huntsman named Garrett, a skilled tracker who had served the royal family for many years, but whose loyalty could be bought with the right incentives. "Take the princess into the deep forest," Morgana commanded, her eyes glowing with supernatural malice. "Tell her you're escorting her on a nature expedition for her botanical studies. Once you're far from the castle, kill her and bring me her heart as proof. In return, I will grant you riches beyond your imagination and ensure your family's prosperity for generations to come." Garrett, though disturbed by the request, found himself unable to resist the queen's magical influence. Under her enchantment, he agreed to carry out the terrible deed. The next morning, he approached Snow White with a fabricated story about discovering a rare grove of medicinal plants deep in the Whispering Woods, plants that could be crucial for her advanced studies in natural healing. Snow White, always eager to expand her knowledge and help others through her understanding of nature's gifts, readily agreed to accompany Garrett on the expedition. She packed her leather satchel with notebooks, specimen containers, and her father's compass, excited about the possibility of making important discoveries that could benefit her people. As they ventured deeper into the forest, Snow White noticed how the usual sounds of woodland creatures gradually faded to an ominous silence. The trees seemed to grow more twisted and menacing with each step, and even the sunlight appeared dimmer beneath the dense canopy. Her instincts, sharpened by years of forest exploration, warned her that something was terribly wrong. When they reached a small clearing surrounded by ancient oak trees, Garrett suddenly stopped and turned to face her, his hand moving to the hunting knife at his belt. The magical compulsion was strong, but as he looked into Snow White's trusting eyes, his natural conscience fought against Morgana's dark influence. "Princess," he said, his voice trembling with internal conflict, "I have been commanded to harm you, but I cannot bring myself to do such an evil thing. You must flee immediately and never return to the castle. The queen means to destroy you, and her power grows stronger each day." Without waiting for her response, Garrett killed a young deer that had been grazing nearby, carefully removing its heart to present to Morgana as false evidence of his completed mission. "Take this path toward the eastern mountains," he instructed urgently. "There are caves and hidden valleys where you might find sanctuary. Trust no one who might report back to the queen, and may the forest spirits protect you." Terrified, but grateful for Garrett's mercy, Snow White began running through the unfamiliar terrain as fast as her legs could carry her. Branches caught at her dress and scratched her arms, but she pressed on, driven by fear and the desperate need to survive. As darkness began to fall, she found herself completely lost in a part of the forest she had never seen before, where the trees grew so closely together that they formed a natural labyrinth. Just when exhaustion threatened to overcome her, Snow White stumbled upon a most extraordinary sight. Nestled in a small valley between two hills stood a cottage unlike any she had ever seen. It appeared to be constructed entirely from natural materials: living wood that had grown into walls, moss-covered stones that formed a foundation, and a roof made of interwoven branches that still bore fresh leaves. The entire structure seemed to pulse with gentle, magical energy. The cottage was clearly inhabited, but everything inside was built on a scale smaller than what humans typically used. 7 tiny beds lined one wall, each with its own unique design and decorations. 7 small chairs surrounded a circular wooden table, and 7 sets of diminutive tools and personal belongings were neatly arranged throughout the single room. Snow White, overcome with fatigue and emotional exhaustion, could not resist the warmth and safety the cottage seemed to offer. She carefully cleaned the already spotless interior, prepared a simple meal from the vegetables growing in the small garden outside, and finally collapsed onto the 7 small beds pushed together, falling into the deepest sleep she had experienced in years. She was awakened the next morning by 7 pairs of eyes staring at her with a mixture of curiosity, concern, and amazement. These were not ordinary dwarfs, as the old stories might have suggested, but rather the forest guardians, ancient beings who had protected the woodland realm for centuries. Each guardian possessed unique abilities and had dedicated their immortal lives to maintaining the balance between the natural and supernatural worlds. Thorin, their leader, was the guardian of earth and stone. His beard sparkled with mineral deposits, and his hands could shape rock and soil with mere thoughts. Bramble, the guardian of plants and growth, had hair like flowing vines and could make any seed burst into bloom. Sage, the guardian of wisdom and memory, carried the knowledge of every creature that had ever lived in the forest. Swift, the guardian of wind and weather, could summon storms or calm tempests with a whistle. Bright, the guardian of light and fire, kept the eternal flame that warmed their cottage and could see truth through any deception. Gentle, the guardian of healing and peace, possessed the ability to mend both physical wounds and troubled spirits. Finally, there was Silent, the guardian of secrets and shadows, who rarely spoke but understood the hidden connections between all living things. "Young princess," Thorin said in a voice like distant thunder, "we know who you are and why you have come to our domain. The forest itself has told us of your stepmother's wickedness and your need for sanctuary. You are welcome to stay with us as long as necessary, but you must understand that accepting our protection will change you in ways you cannot yet imagine." Snow White, still processing the miraculous reality of her situation, gratefully accepted their offer. Over the following weeks, she learned that the forest guardians had been watching her throughout her childhood. Impressed by her natural affinity for plants and animals, they began teaching her their ancient arts, sharing secrets that had been hidden from human knowledge for millennia. Under Bramble's tutelage, Snow White learned to encourage rapid plant growth and to understand the language of flowers. Sage taught her the histories and healing properties of every herb, root, and berry in the forest. Swift showed her how to read weather patterns and communicate with birds and insects. Bright instructed her in the proper use of beneficial fire magic and how to see through illusions. Gentle taught her advanced healing techniques that went far beyond traditional medicine. Silent, though he rarely spoke directly, showed her how to move unseen through the forest and how to sense danger before it arrived. Most importantly, Thorin taught her about the ancient magic that connected all living things, a power that was the opposite of the dark sorcery Morgana practiced. Where Morgana's magic sought to dominate and control, the Guardian's magic worked in harmony with natural forces, healing rather than harming, creating rather than destroying. Meanwhile, back at the castle, Morgana had received Garrett's false evidence with satisfaction and had consulted her mirror once again. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all?" she asked, expecting to hear her supremacy confirmed once more. But the mirror's response filled her with renewed fury. "You are fair, my queen, that's true. But beyond the mountains blue, where 7 guardians dwell in peace, Snow White's beauty will never cease. More beautiful she is than you, and her power grows stronger too." Realizing that Snow White still lived and was somehow growing more powerful, Morgana began preparing more sophisticated methods of elimination. Using her darkest magic, she disguised herself as an elderly peddler woman and set out to find her stepdaughter's hiding place. The magical mirror had revealed that Snow White was being protected by the legendary forest guardians, beings so ancient and powerful that even Morgana would have to approach them with extreme caution. However, she had learned from her studies that the guardians were bound by certain rules and limitations that she might be able to exploit. Morgana's first attempt involved creating a magical corset that would gradually drain Snow White's life force. Disguised as a harmless merchant, she approached the cottage when she knew the guardians were away on their various duties throughout the forest. Beautiful corsets and fine clothing for the lovely young lady, she called out in a disguised voice. Snow White, who had been warned never to trust strangers, but had not yet learned to sense magical deception, was intrigued by the merchant's wares. The corset was indeed beautiful, made of silk that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. "Let me help you try it on, dear," Morgana offered, beginning to lace the corset with supernatural speed and strength. As she pulled the laces tighter and tighter, Snow White found herself unable to breathe, her vision growing dim as the magical garment began draining her life energy. Fortunately, Gentle returned to the cottage just in time to sense his friend's distress. With his healing powers, he quickly cut through the magical corset and restored Snow White's strength, while the false merchant vanished into the forest, leaving behind only the smell of sulfur and dark magic. This was no ordinary attack, Thorin observed grimly when the Guardians had assembled to discuss the incident. "Your stepmother has found us and is using increasingly powerful magic. We must be more careful and begin preparing stronger defenses." Several weeks later, Morgana made her second attempt. This time, she created a magical comb made from the bone of an ancient dragon, imbued with a curse that would slowly poison anyone who used it. Again disguising herself, this time as a kindly grandmother, she approached the cottage offering beautiful hair ornaments. Snow White, despite her earlier experience, was charmed by the woman's apparent frailty and kindness. When the comb touched her scalp, however, it immediately began releasing its poison into her bloodstream. She collapsed within minutes, her skin taking on a gray pallor as the curse spread through her system. This time, it was Sage who discovered her, using his vast knowledge to identify the specific type of curse and find the appropriate counterspell. He carefully removed the comb and spent hours chanting ancient healing words, while the other Guardians channeled their energies to support his efforts. "The attacks are becoming more sophisticated," Bright observed, his eyes literally glowing with anger. "She is learning from each failure and adapting her methods. The next attempt may be beyond our ability to counteract." Indeed, Morgana was growing desperate and increasingly dangerous. Her mirror had informed her that Snow White's magical education was progressing rapidly, and that soon the princess would be powerful enough to challenge even Morgana's dark arts. Time was running out, and the evil queen decided to use her most powerful weapon, an apple, infused with a death curse so complex and potent that no ordinary magic could reverse it. This apple was no simple poisoned fruit. Morgana had spent weeks creating it, combining ingredients gathered from the darkest corners of supernatural realms. Soil from graveyards where evil spirits dwelt, water from cursed springs, and most importantly, a fragment of her own corrupted soul. The curse was designed to trap its victim in a death-like sleep that could only be broken by an act of true love, powerful enough to overcome the darkest magic. For her final disguise, Morgana transformed herself into the appearance of a simple farm woman, carrying a basket of the most beautiful apples anyone had ever seen. She approached the cottage during the one time of day when she knew Snow White might be alone. Early morning, when the Guardians were conducting their daily inspection of their forest domain. "Fresh apples," she called out sweetly. Sweet, crisp apples from the orchards beyond the eastern hills, perfect for a young woman who appreciates nature's bounty. Snow White, who had grown complacent despite the previous attacks, was immediately drawn to the woman's beautiful fruit. The apples seemed to glow with inner warmth, and their fragrance was intoxicating. "These look wonderful," Snow White admitted, though something deep in her mind warned her to be cautious. "Here, try this one," Morgana insisted, offering the most beautiful apple of all, red as fresh blood, smooth as polished glass, and radiating an almost hypnotic appeal. "I grew it myself using special techniques passed down through generations." To allay Snow White's suspicions, Morgana cut the apple in half, eating the white half herself while offering the red half to the princess. What Snow White didn't know was that only the red portion contained the curse. The white half was completely safe. The moment Snow White bit into the cursed apple, the death spell took effect with devastating speed. She collapsed to the ground, her breathing becoming so slow and shallow that it was barely perceptible, her skin taking on a marble-like pallor that made her appear more statue than living person. When the guardians returned and found Snow White in this condition, their grief and rage shook the very foundations of the forest. Trees withered, stones cracked, and even the sky seemed to darken with their collective despair. This curse is beyond anything we have encountered, Thorin admitted, after hours of unsuccessful attempts to revive their friend. It is powered by a fragment of pure evil and can only be broken by an equally powerful force of pure good. They placed Snow White in a crystal coffin that Bright created using his mastery over magical fire and transparent stone. The coffin would preserve her perfectly while they searched for a way to break the curse. For months, they took turns maintaining a vigil, hoping against hope that a solution would present itself. Meanwhile, word of Snow White's fate spread throughout the kingdoms, carried by the birds and woodland creatures who had always been her friends. The tale reached Prince Adrian of the neighboring kingdom of Astoria, a young man renowned for his courage, compassion, and dedication to justice. Adrian had heard stories of Snow White's beauty and intelligence, but more importantly, he had learned of her work with the forest guardians and her growing mastery of beneficial magic. Prince Adrian was not just another royal seeking a beautiful bride. He was a scholar of ancient magic himself, and he understood that Snow White represented something far more significant than a typical princess. She had become a bridge between the human and natural worlds, a guardian of ancient wisdom that could help heal the growing darkness spreading across the land. When Adrian arrived at the cottage in the Hidden Valley, the forest guardians were initially suspicious of his motives, but Silent, who could sense the truth in people's hearts, communicated to his companions that the prince's intentions were pure and his feelings genuine. "I have studied the old texts," Adrian explained to the assembled guardians, "and I believe I understand the nature of this curse. It can only be broken by someone who loves Snow White, not for her beauty alone, but for everything she represents: her wisdom, her connection to nature, her potential to heal the wounds between the human and magical worlds. Foreign nodded slowly. True love is indeed the only force powerful enough to overcome such concentrated evil. But are you certain your feelings meet that standard? I have loved her from afar, not because of her appearance, but because of the stories I've heard of her kindness to all living creatures, her thirst for knowledge, and her desire to use her gifts to help others. Adrian replied honestly, "If that love is true and strong enough, perhaps it can succeed where magic has failed." With the guardian's blessing, Prince Adrian approached the crystal coffin. He knelt beside Snow White's perfectly preserved form and spoke words that came from the deepest part of his heart. "Snow White, if you can hear me, know that you are loved, not just for your beauty, but for your wisdom, your courage, and your pure heart. The world needs the light you bring to it, and I promise to help you fulfill whatever destiny awaits you." When he gently kissed her forehead, a brilliant light filled the cottage. And the sound of the crystal coffin cracking echoed through the valley. Snow White's eyes fluttered open, and the death-like pallor faded from her skin as life returned to her body. But the story did not end with this magical awakening. Snow White's ordeal had changed her profoundly, giving her even greater insight into the balance between good and evil, life and death. She had gained new powers during her cursed sleep, including the ability to sense dark magic from great distances and to purify corrupted natural areas. Together with Prince Adrian and the forest guardians, Snow White returned to confront Morgana. The evil queen's mirror had already informed her of Snow White's revival, and she was preparing for a final, desperate battle, using every dark power at her disposal. The confrontation took place in the castle's great hall, where Morgana had surrounded herself with shadows and illusions, her true form now revealed as something far more monstrous than human. But Snow White, supported by her companions and armed with both natural magic and pure love, proved stronger than all of Morgana's accumulated evil. Rather than destroying her stepmother, Snow White chose to purify the darkness within her, breaking the curses that had twisted Morgana's soul over the years. It was an act of mercy that only someone with Snow White's pure heart could have accomplished. In the end, Morgana was transformed back into the lonely, frightened woman she had been before embracing dark magic. She spent her remaining years in quiet service to others, working to atone for the harm she had caused. Snow White married Prince Adrian in a ceremony that united not just two kingdoms, but also the human and natural worlds in a new age of cooperation and understanding. She continued her studies with the forest guardians while working alongside her husband to rule with wisdom, compassion, and respect for all living things. The magical mirror, cleansed of its dark enchantments, became a tool for seeing truth and promoting understanding between different peoples and species. And Snow White, now recognized as a guardian herself, spent her long life teaching others that true beauty comes not from appearance alone, but from the light that shines within a pure and loving heart. The forest guardians remained her closest advisors and friends, and together they ensured that the balance between light and darkness, nature and civilization, would be maintained for generations to come. Snow White's legacy became one of healing, wisdom, and mortality, inspiring restfulness in deep relaxation. Until the next project passes, Snow White's legacy became one of healing, wisdom, and mortality. In the end, Morgana was transformed back into the lonely, frightened woman she had been before embracing dark magic. She spent her remaining years in quiet service to others, working alongside her husband to rule with wisdom, compassion, and respect for all living things. The magical mirror, cleansed of it, and the transformative power of love over hatred. And they all lived not just happily ever after, but meaningfully and purposefully, using their gifts to make the world a better place for all who would come after them.